people associate Kennedy, JFK, with this UFO issue in the sense that maybe he knew something about it and was trying to get it out to the public.
Well, that's right. Actually, in the book, I cite the evidence that JFK actually became knowledgeable about the UFO topic as early as 1942, and that in 1945 he actually traveled to Germany as a guest of the then Secretary of the Navy, James Forrestal, and witnessed the advanced Nazi technologies that were being considered under Operation Paperclip, and that Kennedy was actually a participant in the Potsdam meeting where you actually had Truman, Stalin, and Churchill discussing the fate of Germany and the rest of the world, and how to divvy up the technologies that their respective militaries were discovering in Germany. And of course, Kennedy was there. So I think that is something that is very suggestive that Kennedy actually saw whatever it was the Nazis were working on, and he actually described it in one of his books. So it's not a well-known book. It's called Prelude to Leadership. It was a book that Kennedy wrote about his travel to post-war Germany, and he described him seeing these advanced Nazi technologies and how impressive they were. And so that was something that Kennedy experienced in 1945, and I think that by the 1960s, when he became president, I think that through his various committee assignments in the House of Representatives and then in the Senate, that he became more knowledgeable about the UFO issue, and that when he became president, he wanted to know, well, what's been happening, and he was basically given the runaround by the CIA that then at the time, and probably even now, basically maintain a monopoly on the most classified UFO files. And Kennedy, from the beginning of his administration, in the book I basically cite various documents and various attempts Kennedy made to learn about the UFO issue and basically have the information released from the CIA. I don't think Kennedy was actually, at that point, committed to disclosing all of this to the public. I think what he wanted to do was to basically prize this information away from the hands of the CIA into the hands of the State Department, into NASA, into the executive branch of the presidency, so that they could make more responsible and more representative decisions as to what to do with this information. And so that was the struggle. It was a bureaucratic struggle, and I think Kennedy basically did a number of things to try to have the CIA release this information, and ultimately paid the sacrifice, or paid a very heavy price for his efforts.
Well, you mentioned Operation Paperclip, and of course that was a very interesting part of our history, and it shouldn't be surprising to some people to think about the Nazis having this advanced technology, because they did. In fact, NASA was started by some of these ex-Nazi scientists, wasn't it?
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, during the end of the Second World War, the most knowledgeable people in space rocketry were former Nazi scientists, and these were all repatriated under Operation Paperclip, those in the Allied zones of occupation. The Russians did the same thing in their areas of occupation. And so basically these people were taken to the United States, former Nazis, and they were the ones that started up the space program. Now, of course, there were a number of secret programs that the Nazis had, and that some of these became highly classified. These were not shared with the general public. So we know of NASA's reliance on people like Werner von Braun for setting up the Apollo program and using conventional rocketry to be able to launch satellites into space and so forth. But those were the kind of unclassified programs. There were also classified programs that these former Nazis had worked on. And certainly Kennedy was exposed to some of this when he was in Germany as a guest of the Secretary of the Navy, James Forrestal, who, as the Navy's secretary, was making the decision as to which of these technologies the Nazi would invest their own the Navy would invest their resources for reverse engineering.
James Forrestal has been linked to MJ-12. Indeed, he is someone that is tied directly to the leadership of it. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Forrestal is actually mentioned on a very important document that has been studied by a number of the leading UFO researchers and has basically been found to not have any kind of falsity attached to it, or it's basically held up to scrutiny very well, and that is the Eisenhower briefing document, and that lists the founding members of MJ-12, and James Forrestal was part of that group of founding members of MJ-12. He's also mentioned by the Truman Memo, which was basically a memo that President Truman issued to set up the Majestic 12 group that would take responsibility on the UFO ET issue. So Forrestal is mentioned in a number of important documents, and that he actually was involved very much in the UFO issue. Now, the important thing to keep in mind here about James Forrestal was that he was also a close friend of John F. Kennedy. And as I mentioned, he took Kennedy as a guest to post-war Germany. He actually wanted to recruit Kennedy into his personal staff, but Kennedy chose to go into politics under pressure by his father, Joseph. But nevertheless, Forrestal and Kennedy maintained a friendship. And I think one of the things that got Forrestal into trouble was that he was actually briefing congressmen about the UFO issue. So here you have Kennedy having a friendship with Forrestal being a member of MJ-12, and Forrestal running into problems because he's briefing these various congressmen about the UFO issue. And I think that is directly relevant to Forrestal's untimely death in 1949, where he supposedly jumped out of the 16th floor medical hospital window to his death, when in fact there was good evidence that he was actually prepared to leave and to basically continue on with his life, but someone wanted to silence Forrestal. He knew too much.
Yeah, very suspicious. Well, tell me what you think was going on in JFK's mind. I mean, he was patriotic. He was somebody who understood the importance of national security and classifying things. Why wouldn't he see the need to toe the line and to keep the secret? Why do you think he was, if he was, trying to get this out against the wishes of the people that he respected and was friends with?
Well, the important thing to keep in mind here was that John Kennedy, as well as James Forrestal, were both very successful Irish Americans. They came from a background of this kind of Irish Catholicism, where people would succeed by their own efforts, and that was very different to the kind of elite culture of that part of the world in New England, Massachusetts, and so forth, where you had an elite establishment where it was really who you knew, typically a kind of a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant culture, where things were done in secrecy. It was all done through connections, and basically if you knew the right people, you would rise high and you would succeed, you would get high public office. Whereas for Kennedy and Forrestal, that was anathema to their kind of Irish Catholic upbringing, where it was really through your own efforts that you would succeed. So when Forrestal and then later Kennedy saw the way in which the UFO issue was being run, they realized that this was being run in a way that would not benefit all Americans. They realized that this was being run in a way that would basically benefit an exclusive elite established in the kind of Northeast, basically the establishment, and that this was something that Kennedy and Forrestal opposed. And so I think you had two very different political cultures there, and Kennedy really did run into great difficulty in trying to deal with that political culture from the old-time establishment that wanted to keep things secret and basically keep it in the kind of old boys network.
Let me ask you about your best guest, because you are the best person to ask. Who is MJ-12 now? Can you give us names of the people that you think are in the inner circle of keeping the UFO ET issue silent?
Well, at this very moment, I can't give you any names. I can refer to people who historically have played significant roles with MJ-12. Whether they continue to play that role, that I'm not sure, in terms of like an official official position with MJ12. Certainly people like Henry Kissinger, Zbigniew Brzezinski, David Rockefeller have all been people that have been very prominent in setting up MJ12, in facilitating its activities. Whether they now are active in any leadership position, that I'm not sure, but certainly they would be kind of respected elders within that kind of MJ12 community. So there probably has been a kind of internationalization of the functions and the roles of MJ12 and the way in which the technologies have been kind of reverse engineered throughout the world, that things are not done exclusively in the United States anymore, but I think especially the echelon countries, and certainly they would be the ones where a lot of the reverse engineering of the programs are now taking place. And, in echelon of countries, I mean places like Canada, Britain, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States, of course. But these are all countries where you will probably have people in very senior positions, whether they're in the military or the intelligence community or the corporate community, because I think this is probably where more and more of the power or more and more of the secrets have gone into the corporate community, because there's no Freedom of Information Act that can actually lead to any of the corporate files being released to the general public.
Yeah. Well, we know that America is very tight-lipped about it, always has been ever since Roswell. What country is the most vocal and you think could lead the way in getting some of this official truth out? Is there any one country that has been more sort of open about this issue?
I think so. I think Russia, the Russian Federation, is actually playing a very important role in leaking this information. There was a very famous incident in December of 2012 when the Russian Prime Minister, Dmitry Medvedev, actually stated on camera, even though it was recorded at the end of an interview, he was still being actually taped. So he says live on camera that every Russian president, when he assumes office, he has two folders given to him. One folder deals with Russia's nuclear secrets, and the other folder deals with the extraterrestrial phenomenon, that basically there's a secret agency that has been set up to monitor extraterrestrials on the planet. Now, that was really dynamite, that the Russian Prime Minister actually said this on air. Yeah. People said that he was joking, but he definitely didn't look as though he was joking. And interestingly, the person who actually asked him the question was referring to a documentary that her network had aired earlier, and Medvedev appeared to be referring to that as a source of information.
Absolutely extraordinary. Dr. Michael Salla, thank you so much for joining us. Your website is exopolitics.org.